Today we're going to talk about market orientation. And a quote from Mark Ritson about leaving the darkness and stepping into the light. It's kind of the subtitle of this recording. So let's start with a question. If I asked you which one of the two CEOs that I'm about to reference has a better chance of reaching targeted customers successfully and selling more product, which person would you choose? 1, a Harvard MBA graduate. 2, a totally unschooled 20-something. Now, if you answered number 1, you're wrong. If you answered number 2, you're also wrong. You can't actually arrive at an answer without asking each of those parties more specific questions. You see, when it comes to knowing your market, paper degrees won't tell you a thing about what your consumers want. The best marketers are those who can admit they actually know nothing about their customers or yours. Nothing. Now, we call this belief, this concept, market orientation. And market orientation is the first step to constructing a solid, long-term marketing strategy. Because when you're market-oriented, you realize that you need to do research to learn about your customer instead of relying on assumptions and hunches that are almost always wrong. In a recent interview, Mark Ritson, and you can find this on everyonehatesmarketers.com, professor of marketing at Melbourne Business School. He's a consultant and he writes for Marketing Week. He weighed in on marketing strategy. Now, by his reckoning, he estimates that, quote, around 80% of marketers, and in some countries 90%, literally have no idea what the hell they're doing, unquote, as it relates to marketing strategy. Most companies are not even market-oriented. Are you? Well, let's find out. So this is part 1 of a 2-part article series, and we're going to dive into market orientation. What is it? Why is it so important? Why it isn't adopted for more companies? Then in part 2, we're going to walk you through how to do market research and apply those findings to your marketing strategy. So what can you expect after these 2 pieces have been broadcast and published? Well, our goal is to help you build a solid foundation for your marketing strategy, one that will remain strong even during uncontrollable industry and consumer shifts. Market orientation and research are the fundamental principles upon which sound marketing strategy is built. Then in future articles, blogs, podcasts, we're going to cover even more critical marketing strategy components like segmentation, targeting, positioning. We will try to build a sequential methodology for you so you can follow along and apply it to your business. So what is market orientation, and why is it so critical for marketing success? Before we go into detail on what market orientation is, let's figure out if you know if you're market oriented. And to find out, I'd like you to answer these questions to yourself honestly. There's 5 of them. You ready? Do you have customer survey data either sitting on your desk or in a software program that you have not had a chance to look at yet? Next question. Did you gather data but don't believe it will actually make a difference in your bottom line? Next question. Do you have a customer service team which you've never polled or asked them about your customers' top concerns? Next question. Do you have customers that have never actually, but you've never actually talked to them face to face, person to person? Next question. When you have marketing meetings, are you the loudest person talking in the room instead of letting your customer data speak or the people closest to your customers speak? Now, out of those questions, if you answered yes to even one of them, you may not be market oriented. But that's okay, because you can start doing so right now, because it's critical for your business. Even if you've been in business for a long time successfully. Let's go into more detail on what market orientation is so you can fully understand how it works and what the next steps are to adopt it for your company. All right? So what is market orientation? Market orientation is kind of like admitting to your significant other that it was you who left the garage door open after you found out someone stole your car. Yeah, it requires humility and lots of it. Okay? The backbone of market orientation is the realization that you are not your consumer, and that literally every opinion and bias you have about your consumer is dead wrong. Now, can you see why this isn't a widely adopted marketing model? Because you've got to admit you're wrong. If you are a market-oriented business owner, you can admit that you know absolutely nothing about your audience, and you realize that it is impossible for you to view your product through the eyes of your audience. Now, this is a powerful attitude. And that's because, one, it allows you to appreciate and understand the value of market research. And two, it's a powerful attitude because you will use that research to inform your company's decisions instead of relying on hearsay, hunches, assumptions, which are all flawed regardless of how well you think you know your audience. Market orientation brings you to zero, so you have no choice but to do market research. When you are market-driven, market-oriented, you have no choice but to do research. Here's an important point to remember. You shouldn't do market research just because you think it's something successful companies do. Performing research without an understanding of how to apply it will never be 100% fruitful. Data collection should hail from a market-oriented mindset that understands your company's success, that success hinges on your ability to pinpoint and meet your consumers' needs. Market orientation is not a one-off tactic or practice. It's a mindset and an approach from which all strategy flows. Think on that. The challenges of market orientation. Let's talk about that. So, let's say you're biased and you think you know your customer. Now, we've already mentioned that that's an impediment to becoming market-oriented. But if you agree with what we are saying and you want to remove the bias, but you still struggle with market orientation, now what? Well, you may be facing some personal challenges to adopting this mindset. You might need to have your brain flushed. So what are typical personal challenges to becoming market-oriented? Well, here's some typical excuses or barriers to entry as it relates to market orientation. Just ask yourself, have you ever had any of these thoughts? And I want you to note that with each personal challenge, we're going to give you a different perspective. That way you can help open your mind to this new normal. You can begin to adopt market orientation. So the first challenge is time. So let's say you have an upcoming launch, a sale, a promotion, and you have too much to do to keep your company growing, so you don't have time to dig into research. We understand that market research can feel like a threat to progress. But the truth is that without customer data, you're falling below your potential as a marketer. And the longer you put it off, the greater chance of failure. And ironically, the more you adopt market orientation, the greater the chance that your products will sell themselves, allowing you to reclaim the time you spend advertising to the wrong audience. So time's an excuse. What about the personal challenge of fear? If you proceed, you're afraid you will find out that you don't have the skills to do market research. The ironic thing here is that failure is good because it shows us that we need to stop relying on what we think we know and instead rely on what our audience and market are telling us. What about the personal challenge of cost? It's too expensive to perform adequate research, and you would rather spend your resources on marketing tactics, like the latest piece of software or paid advertising or organic social media posting? Well, I want to give you a hint, and that's that most marketing research costs are way overestimated. And we're going to talk more about that in the second part of this series. What about your personal arrogance? Well, remember we've already mentioned that humility is essential to becoming market-oriented. What about the personal challenge of your own faulty assumptions? You know, when your last sale was a flop and you thought it was because your landing page design wasn't good enough? If you don't have data to back up that assumption, you should consider yourself 100% wrong, that your landing page may not have had anything to do with it. Let's take another personal challenge that you take after Steve Jobs. Well, Jobs is quoted to have said he didn't do any market research. So marketers often tout his words as ammo to back up their opposition to gathering any data. The truth is that Steve Jobs did plenty of research. He just didn't spend time asking customers what they wanted because his product was so new they wouldn't know it anyway. Instead, he sat back and observed consumer behavior and then predicted the type of product they would buy, while also double-checking his assumptions. We're going to talk about this a little later on. So here's the bottom line. We realize you will face some personal challenges to becoming market-oriented, but you must fight for market orientation and overcome them if you want to build a solid marketing strategy, scale your business successfully, and outperform your competition. Whenever you face a personal challenge to becoming more market-oriented, remember two things, because these are critical to moving forward. Remember, one, that you recognize you are not and will never be your consumer, no matter how strongly you feel. Face your objections, always return to zero, look at the data. Number two, that you have all the tools and resources to discover what your consumers think. It's not difficult, and it's not expensive. And we're going to discuss in the second part of this series of just how to find all of that. Now that's your personal challenges. What about company challenges? In addition to personal challenges, you may also face company-wide challenges that threaten your ability to foster an environment that supports market orientation. The most common company challenges involved touch points. The people who have the influence to create lasting change within your company are often the same people who never interact with customers. If you are a CEO, you may have strategic power, but if you don't interact with customers, it will be difficult to understand the need for a market-oriented culture. On the flip side, your customer service team interacts with customers regularly, and they likely have a better understanding of what the customer thinks and desires, but they typically don't have the power to influence marketing strategy. Rectifying this requires seeing market orientation as not just a specialized company task, but a global perspective or idea that the entire company needs to adopt. To explain this point further, let's look at one of the first definitions of market orientation by Peter Drucker, the American management consultant, educator, and author of a 1954 book considered the practice of management. Peter Drucker says, and I quote, "Marketing is so basic that it is not just enough to have a strong sales department and entrust it to marketing. Marketing is not only much broader than selling, it's not a specialized activity at all. It encompasses the entire business. It is the whole business seen from the point of view of its final result. That is, from the customer's point of view. Concern and responsibility for marketing must therefore permeate all areas of the enterprise." A quote from Peter Drucker. Market orientation is not a one-time tactic. You can't just develop a new system and launch it once and expect the birth of a market-oriented culture. And that's because marketing is fluid. It's never static. And so is market orientation. Market orientation is a company-wide approach that constantly informs your strategy as your audience and industry change. Once you implement a marketing strategy, you will continually glean insight and adapt accordingly, learning and growing, avoiding past failures, and gaining more data as you go. Market orientation is also much more than just gathering customer data. Now, according to John Narver, and this is at msi.org/reports, he's a professor of marketing and the director of the Center for Retail and Business Market Strategy at the University of Washington. John Narver is quoted as saying, "Market orientation is a business culture committed to creating superior value for buyers through three combined behaviors: customer orientation, competitor orientation, and interfunctional coordination," unquote. John Narver, professor of marketing, University of Washington. Now, this information suggests that market orientation includes gaining business intelligence on both customers and competition. The data gleaned from research should then filter through every company department. That's what's meant by interfunctional coordination. And all personnel should apply what they've learned to their communication with customers, whether they communicate with the customer directly or indirectly. Why is market orientation important? Why should I even worry about market orientation? And what's in it for me, the business owner? Well, so we've talked a lot about market orientation and how it helps you understand your customers and position yourself better in the market. And that's highly valuable to any business organization. But I suspect I can hear you saying, "What's in it for me?" So let's talk dollars and cents, shall we? According to some research at msi.org, companies that are more market-oriented enjoy higher profitability, superior sales growth, greater customer retention, and better new product success. What happens if you're not market-oriented? Failing to become more market-oriented or totally market-oriented can make you irrelevant in any highly competitive marketplace and put your entire company or organization in jeopardy. More on that later. Having said that, if you haven't completely embraced the idea of market orientation, you're not alone. It's not widespread, mainly because of three competing concepts: paid advertising, new products, and being sales-oriented. Now, I want you to review your company practices and notice if any of these competing orientations are conflicting with your ability to become more market-oriented. We just mentioned those three, so let's start with advertising orientation. Does your marketing strategy focus only on social media, pay-per-click ads, and content marketing? Because when you are advertising oriented, you believe marketing solely encompasses content and advertising. And as you see this as the totality of customer experience, we often call this putting lipstick on a gorilla. Looks pretty, right? You can't make your content as flashy as you would like the brightest red lipstick. But if you don't create the content from a deep understanding of your audience, you're only focusing on 10% of marketing. And then when you remove that lipstick, you still have a gorilla. 90% of marketing is brand strategy, research, targeting, segmentation, positioning. If you focus only 10%, you're missing out on a major part of your marketing strategy if you're really focusing on paid advertising to that degree. That doesn't mean that focusing on the 10% won't land you quick gains. You know, an advertising agency created the Fearless Girl campaign for State Street Global Advisors for the anniversary of its She Fund, which invests only in companies that place women in top leadership positions. The campaign features a statue of a girl facing down the Wall Street Bull. I'm sure you've seen it. You can see a picture of it on Business Live. Reuters has published it many times. Well, this campaign went viral and demonstrated that focusing on the 10% can result in hefty gains. However, the campaign did not give attention to the other 90%, that being brand strategy, positioning, targeting, segmentation, research. The advertising agency lacked diversity in its own company, so there was a disconnect with the campaign. The campaign lacked no shortage of hype, but its long-term effectiveness fell short. Point number 2 we mentioned earlier, product orientation. Most companies are totally oriented to their product. You've probably created products without even talking to your target audience. And if you have, you are probably product-oriented. Product orientation judges the success of a product through a company's core competencies, not the eyes of the consumer. It focuses solely on company resources like equipment, talent, and neglects finding out if products will meet the needs of a marketplace. The greatest product, if you don't have a market that thinks it's viable, it just won't be viable. So are you product oriented? A lot of companies are. You're product oriented if you are focused on selling what you create instead of creating what the market demands. You're probably product oriented if you focus on training the customer to love your products instead of creating products the customer will love. Popular author and expert marketer Seth Godin is quoted as saying, "Don't find customers for your products. Find products for your customers." Let's talk about the company 3M. 3M is a product-oriented company. Stands for Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing. Their R&D department of its commercial tape division developed and patented the adhesive component that you know well as the backside of a Post-it note. 1 year, 1 full year before it figured out how to commercially apply it. So thankfully it worked out. Can you see how risky that is? You are essentially creating a product without knowing if the market will adopt it or how to use it. Are we saying that you should abandon creating an excellent product, only listen to your customers 100% of the time? Not at all. You still need to assess your capabilities, no question. The key here is to focus on creating a product that resonates with customers based on research. Then balance that with creating a product your company can actually produce and that it makes sense to the rest of your organization. Let's talk about companies that are sales-oriented. Sell, sell, sell. That's the key to business growth and longevity, right? Just sell. Not necessarily. Again, the famous Peter Drucker is quoted as saying, "Selling and marketing are anti-theatrical rather than synonymous or even complementary. There will always be, one can assume, a need for some selling, but the aim of marketing is to make selling superfluous. The aim of marketing is to know and understand the customer so well that the product or service fits them and sells itself. In an ideal world, marketing should result in a customer who's ready to buy." That's a quote by Peter Drucker, 1973 Management Tasks, Responsibilities, and Practices, from page 64 through 65. Sales-oriented companies are revenue-focused and leverage marketing solely to drive sales and generate leads. They are also place supreme emphasis on improving the abilities of the sales force. And that's not necessarily bad. I mean, you do want to sell the product. I get that. But when this hustle doesn't emanate from understanding customer needs, it puts your business in a vulnerable position and threatens your longevity in a highly competitive market. Ford Motor Company was in a vulnerable position before Alan Mulally became its CEO in 2006. The motor company, pre-Mulally, encompassed many brands and products in an attempt to be all things to all people, to sell to everyone and grow faster. This strategy became to sink the company. Revenue was up, profits were down. Mulally sold off a lot of Ford's brands and forced the company to be less sale-oriented and more focused on consumer needs, resulting in a huge profit surge. Sales and revenue are not the sole determinants of how well your company is doing. Focus on profits first, as they are indeed the lifeblood of your business. But profits come before sales growth. Temporary sales promotions and tactics may work in the short term to help you, but as your customers' needs and the industry changes, you have to become market-oriented. If not, your business is vulnerable to competitors who are constantly improving product quality according to changing market and customer needs. And that could leave you in the dust. What about predictive market orientation? Kind of the crystal ball of marketing. How would you like to know your customers better than they do? Imagine if you could look into a crystal ball to predict your customers' future behavior and market to them based on your predictions. That crystal ball is indeed market research. And this practice, called predictive market orientation, does exist. Here's a few examples. Let's look at Target. A father was angry at Target for advertising pregnancy products to his non-pregnant daughter. Later, it was discovered that the girl was in fact pregnant. And Target's algorithm had uncovered that by comparing her purchasing behavior with past customers. With Target's customer and behavioral research, it was able to predict that this customer was indeed pregnant even before she knew she was. Oof. How about Walmart? This giant retail stocks up in advance of heavy weather situations. They watch weather. They shift inventory to stores based on weather, filling its shelves with top products sold during similar weather-related events. So do you have to be as big as Target and Walmart to practice predictive market orientation? Absolutely not. All it requires is gathering data on past customer behavior and purchase history and using a little creativity to predict future behavior. Again, in part 2, we're going to dive more into this. So are you ready to adopt market orientation? Because we've discussed how and why market orientation is a necessary foundation to creating a rock-solid marketing strategy, how to overcome personal and company challenges, and what competes for your attention when adopting market orientation. we've summarized a lot of things we're going to discuss. And I'd also like to summarize the things we just did discuss and list what I hope are your biggest takeaways. Because if you remember nothing else, take these following 4 points with you and apply them to your business. Stay humble, point 1. Remember, you aren't your consumer and you know nothing. Start from zero. Let go of your bias. Let go of your opinions. Let go of your point of view and talk to the people who do know your customer. Number 2, work on your personal challenges to market orientation. Reframe your objections into an ascended perspective that overcomes objections and approaches the subject with an expected end goal of adopting market orientation. Number 3, observe the company organizational challenges to becoming market-oriented and work to get the entire company on the same page. That page being adopting a market orientation mindset. Point 4, pay attention to competing orientations. Being overly advertising oriented, being overly product oriented, being overly sales oriented. Those are competing orientations to market orientation. And make note that when you fall into these orientations, that you need to return to a more holistic, research-based focus. Soon we'll have part 2 of this discussion on market orientation as we continue this series and discuss how to perform market research for any budget and get you one step closer to defining and creating a rock-solid marketing strategy. This is Viral Solutions, and we're committed to seeing your business succeed. It's our goal to grow your business with proven marketing strategies that will help leverage your business for the long haul, no matter what industry you're in. So stay up to speed in the ever-changing world of marketing and listen often to our marketing tips, where we discuss the loopholes and the news that we hope will explode your return on investment. You can check us out at viralsolutions.net or call us at 888-816-1222.